just had a bizarre thought, so bear with me. Thank you, Mason, for talking about tortillas, because it made me wonder, what if the Israelites were Texans? I mean, they made tortillas and they smoked a whole goat. I mean, come on, barbecue and tortillas. Good chance. Anyway, so what is it? Those are the words that every good cook hates to hear. What is it? I like to cook. I am not necessarily a good cook. I used to take pride in my cooking skills, and then something happened to humble me. 3 somethings happened to humble me. We had some children who maybe aren't as fond of my cooking as I would like them to be. But the big moment that happened was, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even more. And Lauren and I were celebrating an anniversary, and we've been watching a lot of cooking shows. And so I decided to get really fancy with what I was going to make for our anniversary dinner. And so I made steak au poivre, which I think I'm saying correctly. And I made spinach risotto on a side salad. And I was really proud of myself. And I put it on the plate. I plated it perfectly. It looked beautiful. And I put it down on the table in front of Lauren and in front of the kids. And I hear, what is it? How do you think God felt when God heard that? What is it? That's what manna means. That's a translation of the word manna is what is it? The Israelites saw this stuff on the ground. They said, what is it? After all God's been through with them. You know, last week we talked about God calling Moses to get the Israelites out of slavery and speak to Pharaoh. Well, since that time, God, Moses, and Aaron, Moses' brother, have been talking to Pharaoh. They have been negotiating with Pharaoh, and they've been trying to get the Israelites out of slavery. We had the plagues, the 10 plagues. We tried to name them this morning in Sunday school. Do y'all think you can name them? No? Good guess. All right, that's right. So the first plague, was the water of the River Nile turned to blood, the fish died, then we had frogs, and then you had lice and biting insects, you had swarming insects and wild beasts, you had boils, you had locusts, you had darkness, you had one more that I'm forgetting. Which one?
The hail.
Hail that came down? That's somewhere else. No, yeah, that's right. You got it. Thank you. I knew there was another one. I forgot. The storms. That's right. And then there was the most tragic of the plagues, the death of the firstborn. After all of this, finally, Pharaoh decides to let the people go. And once they are going, Pharaoh says, wait a minute, changes his mind. And so Pharaoh sends his army after the people. And God has Moses depart the waters of the Red Sea so the people can escape on dry land. When Pharaoh's army tries to follow, the waters collapse upon the army. And finally, people are free. And God is leading them to a land of milk and honey. Well, when we come to the text today, they have been on this path to the land of milk and honey for about a month. And they're out of food. They are getting hungry. A few weeks ago when we talked about Esau, we talked about when he got hangry. You know what I'm talking about? Hangry, when you're so hungry you get angry. Well, the Israelites are beyond this point. They are beyond being hangry. They are so hungry that they've even changed the way they remember their past. They look back on the past at that time when they were slaves being persecuted in Egypt, and they look at it with fond memories of how they all had plenty to eat. Of course, that's not true. There's that phrase, we always see the past through rose-colored glasses. That's what the Israelites are experiencing. And so God said, fine, on top of all of that, I am going to make bread come down from heaven. Pretty miraculous, don't you think? Kind of like making spinach risotto from scratch. I'm going to make bread come down from heaven. And so the Israelites have this bread finally come down from heaven. Bread that will fill their bellies and stop their grumbling and restore their faith in God. Bread that will make them happy to be free children of God rather than missing being slaves in Egypt. Bread from heaven which comes down and it gets there and they say, what is it? Wonder how God felt. Israelites didn't seem very grateful. They were kind of thinking, yeah, great, God, you saved us once, but what have you done for us lately? What is it? But we probably shouldn't be too harsh on the Israelites for their lack of gratitude to God, because they really were hungry. They were going through trying times, and it is really difficult to have faith in trying times. Now, I don't know about y'all, I don't know your background with food, but in my life, I guess I've been hungry, but I've never been hungry like the Israelites were hungry. I have never been in a place where there is no food available to eat and there is no prospect of future food to eat. Like I said, that word hangry, people I know get hangry after they've skipped a meal or skipped a snack. Not that kind of hungry for the Israelites. This is belly button sticking to the back of your spine hungry for the Israelites. They are truly in trying and difficult and exhausting times. And when you have no food and when you are hungry, those times get even worse. A couple of weeks ago, almost a month or so ago, was the start of school. We know every year about this time when school starts, our educators remind us how important it is for children to have a well-balanced diet, for children to have a good, nutritious meal. They need to be fed so that they can excel at being students. There was an article in the New York Times recently about a senior high school in St. Paul, Minnesota. It is a 90-90-90 school. That means that 90% of the students are minorities. It means that 90% of the students are living at the level of poverty or lower. And it means that 90% of those students not only graduate, but go on to enroll in college after graduation. Recently, that number has dropped down into the 80s, I believe. The secret, one of their many secrets, to getting these children into that next stage of growth and into adulthood is that the school provides 3 nutritious meals a day. They know how important it is for learning minds to be fed. When people are hungry, they do not listen. Jesus knew this. In the New Testament, when people come from everywhere and they come out to listen to Jesus preach, and they're all sitting there and they have nothing to eat, Jesus knows these people need food. And he takes some loaves and some fish, and suddenly there is enough for all. When people are hungry, it is just about impossible for them to focus on anything at all. These are difficult and trying times. Now, like I said, I don't know y'all, and I'm doubting that any of us have ever been that hungry. But there are people in our community who deal with that kind of hunger. These are difficult and trying times. We may not experience that hunger ourselves, but that doesn't mean these are not difficult and trying times. I mean, we recently remembered and were reminded that the rise of gun violence in this country is constant. Recently there was another mass shooting, the largest we have ever experienced, and no one knows why. These are trying times. Not only does no one know why, but no one seems to be willing to come together to discuss how to make these mass shootings stop. These are trying and difficult times. Recently in Longview, a big discussion about what's going on in our city has to do with the homeless. These are trying times. There are people who have no place to live, and yet we keep doing the same things we have always done, except for adding a law that makes it more difficult for street people to be street people. These are difficult and trying times, and no one seems to want to really talk about how to make them better. It is difficult to have hope and to have faith in trying times. But the secret to the Israelites having a renewed hope and a renewed faith wasn't just in the manna that came down. It was in the amount. They received just enough for that day. Just enough to get on to the next day. Just enough. No one had too much. No one had too little. They had just enough. The beauty of having just enough is that it's not too much, and it's not too little. It is just enough. And they needed that just enough to renew their hope, to renew their faith in the promises of God. Many years ago, in probably a different lifetime, I was a participant in National Outdoor Leadership School. We spent about 30 or so days in the Wind River Wilderness in Wyoming. And about 2 or 3 weeks in, there were 12 students and 3 instructors in the class. About 2 or 3 weeks in, 3 of the students got lost. And not just gone for a few hours, gone for over 24 hours, overnight. And so the instructors spread out one day and canvassed as much of the area as they could, with a few of the students helping them in support in their hiking, because we were way off the grid. And some of us stayed in base camp as lookout to try to coordinate if they came back or if we saw signs of them. And then that evening, when the instructors came back with some really exhausted looking students, one of the instructors looked at me and said, "I need a freshie. I need someone to go with me." Because it had gotten to the point that we had not found them and we didn't know what to do, so we had to get out of the wilderness and find a phone and organize a bigger search. So as the sun went down, my instructor and I started hiking out to try to find the phone. We had to go a minimum of 11 miles. Over that 11 miles, we had to climb nearly 3,000 feet. And it was a long slog. And it was dark. There weren't a lot of stars. That was the night I learned the beauty of headlamps and why they're so important. Because with the headlamp, I could see the ground right in front of me. We had a long way to go, and we were tired. And all we could see was that ground right in front of us. But seeing that ground right in front of us, that was just enough to keep us plodding along, step after step, mile after mile, until finally we did get out. Finally we did find a phone. And don't worry, everybody was okay. I read this week from a writing from Henry Nouwen. And he says, "Often we want to be able to see into the future. We say, how will next year be for me? Where will I be 5 or 10 years from now?" There are no answers to these questions. Mostly we have just enough light to see the next step. What we have to do in the coming hour or the following day. The art of living is to enjoy what we can see and not complain about what remains in the dark. When we are able to take the next step with the trust that we will have enough light for the step that follows, we can walk through life with joy and be surprised at how far we go. Let's rejoice in the little light that we carry and not ask for the great beam that would take all shadows away. The Israelites were in a trying time, so trying that they no longer really wanted to be free. No longer felt what it really meant to be free. But when they got just enough manna from God, it reminded them of how much they wanted to be free. They needed just enough to renew their faith in God. So at the time, even though they had been released from slavery, they were not really free. Claire Massoud wrote once that to be truly free, to have nothing to lose, to regain hope, that's what freedom means. The Israelites were coming to that place where their hope and their faith was going to be renewed through just enough. Now again, I'm not assuming or suggesting that my experience or your experience is as trying or as difficult as the hunger that the Israelites felt or the hunger that other people in the world feel, but we do know that these are trying times. And I confess that sometimes in trying times, it is hard to keep hope and keep faith in the Lord. When you see more and more people killed, it is hard to keep faith and hope in the Lord. When you see more and more signs of poverty and of sickness and of illness and war, it is hard to keep faith and hope in the Lord. it can get downright depressing. But we have to find that just enough that renews our hope, that renews our faith, that just enough that keeps us going in the Lord. Now, I don't know what that just enough is for you, but I can tell you one of the just enough things for me. Every week, I get to do chapel for the children of PCC. And every week at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, I start to dread it, for sure. Because for as wonderful as it is that these children get to have chapel every week, you have to remember, it's 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and there are 50 plus 2 to 6-year-olds in there for chapel. And I start to drag my feet, and I start to wonder and doubt, gosh, does this do any good at all? But then, I get the taper, the lighter that our acolytes use to light the candles. And as we walk down the hall, they're all shouting, it's my turn, I want to light the light. And then we get into the chapel, and they know the words to the songs, and they know the motions to the songs, and they want to be there. And then they see me in the hallways, and they say, hi, Mr. Kendall. That's the only place they see me, and they say, hi, Mr. Kendall. That is my just enough to get me through a really bad day. What is your just enough? The just enough that God gives you to restore your hope and to restore your faith.